Nevertheless, we still great again. Restrictive covenants hit like bricks. We great migrate again. Redlined, we wait. We congregate like food pantries and funeral wakes. Breaths held like sentencing dates. Hoping for change like '08. The city is a project. Public works in progress. We budget for broken promises. The black rabble in a parking lot where lakeside daisies used to be. In UV, we see the block is soaked redder than they would believe. Wearily, we seek our daily bread, pearl crescents inflamed. Disenfranchised insects have to eat, even if it's dogbane. Like uncle's hand-me-down compression socks, life expectancy falls. Nevertheless, we, the people, find soft tissue and push through. Carpool to the pharmacy drive-through, split the bus pass to dialysis. Since the Constitution, our family history been a qualifying life event. Half the claim covered, no flex to spin, avoiding fruits and vegetables. The other molar sits, rotting in. Shameful how our pain been cared for less. Substandard deviation and educated guess. Yes, after cultural competence training, they will treat us fully, 3/5. Significant tenures from our insignificance. Meanwhile, safety net clinics stay short-staffed and federally qualified. So Brother Death volunteers since dawn outside. Navigates the line patiently, clipboard and scythe, greets the abuelas with pride in their eyes. Buenas noticias, la traductora está aquí, por favor entren, es seguro, no hay CE inside. We still wait again, shamed in the intake again, praying we not blamed for the pre-existing conditions.
Ooh, thank you so much, Saleem.
Thank you.
For just putting that into the air. What a beautiful poem. How does one write a poem like this? There's, if you're not seeing this on the page, there's 3 different columns. Like when I first came to it, I started reading, first column, second column, and then it occurred to me, I was like, wait, there's way more play on the page. I can read it all the way across too.
I did a couple diagonal ones too, so that's exciting to hear. So with this particular piece, with Nevertheless, I knew, I did not know the title from the start. Often that's the last thing I do when writing a piece. However, I knew that the first line, I knew it was "We Still Great" again, right? And so obviously pushing back, I wrote this piece in 2020, although it's, coming out in 2021. And so we're still under, a previous administration that had the slogan of "Make America Great." Or "Make America Great Again." I don't really remember. But the point is, I wanted to push back and how that short set of words that had been associated with a particular platform, a lifestyle, a way of exclusion, a way of discrimination, etc. Even how those words sort of punched, like "make America," like those words literally would hurt, and or kill, right? And so I wanted to see how I could sort of play with the idea of greatness, and is there a way to kind of use some of that language and interrogate, what does a great society look like, a great city, a great country, and a great people, what does that actually look like? So that was kind of the impotence for the 3 columns, and wanting to hopefully inject this with a sense of rhythm as we go through, in spite of how the topics might have been heavy at times.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that echo, there's so much to unpack. Like you were saying, like to push back against, to protest, but also to reclaim one's greatness,
Right.
to be like, we've always been great.
Right.
I was hearing echoes of Gwendolyn Brooks, the pool players, like, we real cool, we left school, we lurk late, we strike straight. That really, like, it's a wonderful beat, but there's a propulsion there. Like It carries us through the poem.
Right.
And I wanted to ask you about the musicality of your work. Is that something that you think about when you conceive of the poem, or is that something that kind of just naturally seeps into it?
Well, first of all, that's a huge compliment to even be in the same conversation, let alone sentence, as the legend, Miss Brooks. And I'm also smiling because a piece I just wrote last month is I'm starting a series looking at the, a lot of people have probably seen that famous photo of Negro boys on Easter Sunday. And so there are two Works Progress Administration, so federal photographers who are hired across a 2-3 week period to document life in the Black Belt in the 40s. And so that was just one picture of, I don't know, they're on the Library of Congress. I've scrolled through and there are hundreds of them, right? And so it's kind of doing this ekphrasis piece where I'm sort of mashing up Gwendolyn Brooks poems with these black and white photos. And so I'm just smiling because the one I had just written was a golden shovel of that golden shovel. So it was just, that was funny. Sort of taking the pool players and saying, what let's imagine their life. And so it's a piece looking at the fathers of the pool players, right? And so again, just thinking about family. So rhythm is so important to me. Sometimes when I write, I am writing to music that I'll produce myself. And other times I'm writing with the idea of hoping that if somebody's reading it, they're kind of nodding their head, right? And kind of that idea of after you write a piece, walking up and down the driveway and saying it out loud. And if I stumble, that's not a good example because I have a vestibular disorder, so I stumble a lot. But if you were to read it and something doesn't really work, then it's time to come back to that page. And so literally drafts, I would go through and be like, stumbled or tripped or the meter was off, even though on the page it still looked like it fit in the column. The meter was off when walking and reading it. So the musicality and the rhythm was really important.
I love that image of you walking with the poem. It feels so embodied. Like when I read it, I couldn't help but, like feel that punctuation, feel that movement in that beat. And I think a poem for me that makes me really happy is something that connects my mind to my body and makes us feel like, these poems aren't written in ivory towers. They're written for people and by people to be enjoyed.
Right.
To memorialize things, but also, to celebrate.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's so great to hear. And, just knowing that it's a shame every time I meet somebody who says like, I can't read poetry or I can't understand poetry or those sort of joke. It'd be like, I wish I was smart enough to understand poetry. And it's like, come on. I mean, granted, I don't think an artist should necessarily have to write in a particular way for a particular audience. And we always need some avant-garde because that's life. But I also think there's something to be said for kind of opening the door and opening the room for folks to enter the page and find where they fit. I had to shout out some of my colleagues back in Chicago. Contextos is this incredible nonprofit, and they use memoir writing with adults who have either been part of the criminal justice system, are currently incarcerated, or have been impacted. Their lives have been impacted by incarceration. And just that idea of claiming your story and rewriting your story, and when other people control your narrative, what that means over a lifetime, right? And so that's something that I've learned from working with those everyone is called an author. They're not called a client or a participant. They're called an author. And, working with those authors, reading with them in Cook County Jail, like really realizing that these aren't just la 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 la, like people died trying to learn to read. And just it's such an honor and a responsibility, anytime we publish and put something out there for the world.
That is, I feel it in the poem. It's so beautiful, that intricacy of the responsibility, with literacy and how much of a privilege it is as well. I think that's just so remarkable. Yeah, to remind all of us that many people are not in control of their own narratives.
Right.
So speaking, however the I speaks in a poem is really remarkable. And I think when folks say that poetry isn't for them, or that they're, maybe that they can't access poems, I always ask them, like, what is a poem to you? You know what I mean? What is your conception of it? So I guess, what is a poem to you, Saleem? Like, how would you define it?
Gosh, man. Okay. That's one of those questions where you're on a panel. You wish that the person to provide you ahead of time, you're like, woo, that's what is a poem to me was the question.
Yeah, I mean,
wow.
like, I gotta get paid extra for this, but
yeah,
I mean, even in the most basic sense, right? Because we talk
no,
about poems as songs,
yeah,
as
yeah.
memorial.
I'd say a poem to me is some truth. I wouldn't say all truth or the truth, but some truth. Because you can read something and you can tell like, nah, I didn't really feel this, and I'm not saying I didn't feel this as in I didn't like it, but like literally I didn't feel this,
Right.
and kind of, I think the poems for me, that make that just, when I look at the poem and I finish it and I'm like, I'm not the same person anymore because I experienced that poem. And especially when that happens page after page after page over the course of a book, I mean, that's the dream right there, to sort of be able to shape and reshape and tear apart and build back up, from cover to cover with a person. So that's the dream. And that's why poetry should be able to be accessible so everybody can experience that feeling of being, built up anew.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Ooh, I'm glad I asked that question.
Yeah.
And I feel like
some truth
is successful in that way, in that as I'm reading it, I feel like the trap doors of like my heart and intellect and emotions, it's like, we keep they keep opening onto these new like vistas. You know what I mean?
Wow. Yeah.
It was really successful for me in that way.
Thanks. I appreciate that. That's part of what I was hoping to do with, I think we mentioned kind of being able to read it in multiple directions and from different ways, and sort of not wanting to delegate how the reader had to experience it. But one thing, that I'm thinking about is often when you write a poem and then by the time it comes out to the public, if it's published, a lot might have changed, in your process or your life. During the course of this, even things I talk about like diabetes, like I didn't know I was going to be diagnosed with diabetes, dealing with the medical system. I had no idea my mom was going to be diagnosed with cancer and pass away 9 weeks later. And, just so many of these systems that I wanted to hopefully interrogate. Stylistically, it also makes me think of how this poem was kind of like just the beginning of something that I've really been trying to push, in many ways, motivated by I would like to say she's a mentor, but if not, I would say at least a poet that I strongly admire. Dawn Lundy Martin told me in a workshop, she said, I'd encourage you to break free of the tyranny of the left margin. And like that stuck with me. That was June of 2019. And just that idea of, I don't think I necessarily accomplish it here because there's still plenty of left margin, but of just this idea of like my whole life was told like, this is how you have to exist on the page. And like how liberating when you realize that you don't have to exist that way on the page, both in what you say and in how you say it and in how it's presented. And so that's a thing that I hope that I'm really pushing in the last year since, working on this piece, that's coming across in my current work even more.
Absolutely. That's so wonderful to free yourself from the tyranny of the left margin. And I think this poem pushes back in the sense that it really magnifies it. It's in triplicate. It's like 3D, simultaneous. All these different moves are happening in the poem. So in that way, I felt like it injected a really nice sense of like resistance and agency, but also play, that movement again too.
That's great to hear. Can I do a quick side note? When you said play, have 6.5-year-old twins, and again, props to the in-laws for taking them out for ice cream right now, because otherwise there would be all sorts of stuff in the background. But our daughter is just started a poetry unit in school, and so it's so fascinating. I'm doing e-learning all day, so I'm always hearing like different classrooms, and their first day they're like, okay, we're going to talk about our poetry voice. And I was kind of like, okay, where's this going? And she was like, when you read poems, you read them in a different voice than how you talk. And I was still kind of like, okay, where's this going? But that notwithstanding, it's just been so cool to see a 6.5-year-old be taught the concept of voice, and of her sort of realizing like, well, this is my speaking voice, this is my singing voice, this is my funny poem voice, this is my copycat poem voice, which that doesn't sound like plagiarism. It's like they had to write a poem that sounded like a nursery rhyme. But, to just sort of watch her, sort of come into her own of like, I can have different voices. And it's just one of those moments where I'm like, I'm so glad that quarantine is awful, but I just got to listen to her, sort of realize, 30 something years earlier than I did, that you have different voices and they all can be part of you.
That's so wonderful too, thinking about all of our different selves as they show up on the page, whether all sides of us are on the page, whether there's a single self that day.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Props.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Elementary poetry class.
Yeah, but I mean, you made me think about a couple specific voices that that showed up, in this poem. I have a line, and I feel like I'm getting deja vu, like I already told you this, but I don't think I did. About the other avoiding fruits and vegetables, the other molar sits rotting in, and that was real life. That was one of my barbers who had to choose right molar or left molar, and then wait for a year knowing that the other side of her mouth was rotting, and what does that mean every day when there's a system, the Medicare, it said, this is what we will cover. If I wasn't blessed to have a spouse with private health insurance, I wouldn't qualify for a cochlear implant because single-sided deafness is not covered because you still have a good ear, a functioning ear, And so just thinking about the different systems that hopefully got interrogated, but without losing sight of, these being real people and, real compression socks, right? And these real carpools to dialysis. So that was really important to me.
Yeah, and I like how the system of a poem can absorb all this dailiness. You know what I mean? It's almost like it's always listening and always bringing in to the poem too. And I always think about the best poems. We were talking about being moved, and the word authenticity was coming to mind too. Like, this poem is so authentic; it doesn't feel like, oh, this is a poem about X, right?
Oh, good.
Like, this poem argues this. It's just existing and being. And I think, hats off to you for making this poem, so inviting and authentic, so that by the time we get to the end of it, we are changed, like you said.
Oh, that's great. That's an honor. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And I was going to ask you, Saleem, if there's anyone you want to shout out that, is a poetry mentor. I always think of like mentors of the mind, right?
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll shout out like a couple of mentors and then a couple of things that I've been reading. So I say at the mentor list, for sure, just the whole Cave Canem community. Was blessed to be able to go before quarantine, and just to be in a room with Black poets. I had never experienced that, and it was like, I kept waiting. I joked that I kept feeling, on Showtime with Apollo, like the Sandman comes out and like pulls you off the stage. Like, I kept expecting the Sandman to come pull me off and be like, whoops, we made a mistake. But I was like, it's imposter syndrome, right? We got to push through that. So I'd say Raymond and Trobos has been extremely supportive, especially on this hearing journey of, losing my hearing within the last 18 months, and himself being a deaf poet. I'd say another mentor, Eve Louise Ewing, for sure. I got to throw the Dr. Eve on front of that, as our kids call her, and kind of this idea of mastery, right? And but like in the Kerry James Marshall sort of way of, if there are 10 disciplines of painting, becoming a master at each of those disciplines by focusing so intently, so that, if it's I don't want to show up, but I don't know art terms, so I apologize. I'm about to start naming like something that's, but anyway, different genres, and how I feel like in many ways Dr. Ewing does the same thing, right? If it's going to be a puppet show, if it's going to be a play, if it's going to be, I'm waiting for that opera to come next, if it's going to be a comic book, and kind of that idea of pushing my own art and trying new things for the excitement of it too. And I'd say, as far as the things that I'm reading right now, I'm reading Courtney Lamar Charleston's newest book, Doppelgangbanger, and that's incredible as far as just somebody of a similar age and coming up at the same time and getting a lot of these references, but also being firmly rooted in hip hop in both the positive and kind of problematic ways that can shape the identity as young black boys in that case. Tyree Day's book Cardinal just came right at the right time for me. He has these I'd say vintage just because it's, not with a cell phone camera, but photos, family photos that are interspersed between the poems. And just thinking of that idea as I've been looking through so many family photos, as we're that my mom kept, and just really thinking of how powerful it is to bring your people with you and to have them there on a page next to these words. And it's just something so simple, but to give voice to people who got you where you are. And then I'd say the only other collection that has just floored me recently is Ansel Elkin's book Blue Yodel. I think it's a couple years back, but I think you sometimes find books when you need them, not necessarily when they're published, right? And so that was one of those books where I'm 3 poems in, I'm like, I can't read this anymore. This is incredible. This is like not just that it's great poetry, but it's like literally things I had dreamt that I saw on the page. Like I literally was like, I had a dream where I was like part deer and then da 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 da, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, I think that's the dream I just had. Like, how did she do that? And really pointing to kind of how poetry can open up doors and windows inside of yourself, and sort of making me look at my process and kind of my artistic development in a different way. So those are the folks I'd say, both on the mentor side and the what's on the bookshelf, side.
Thank you so much for taking us through that like creative trajectory. It's been so amazing, Saleem. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this like beautiful spring look.
Oh, thank you.
It's given me hope for the summer too.
Right. Thanks.